And I'd like to support the amendment. Minister, in fairness, I give you 10 out of 10 for style. It was a good reply, but probably a bit less on substance, because your reply got right to the heart of, I think, what the concern across the House is, echoed by your own backbenchers. You said that this is a tax on assets. But it's not a tax on assets. That's the whole problem with this. Let's keep using the example that Deputy Doherty used. €250,000 purchase price, €60,000 market value. What's the asset? The asset is the loan. The asset is the $250,000 that the bank owns. So if we're going to tax the asset, let's tax the bank, because they're the owner of the asset. In fact, they own the house and they own the additional amount, the extra $190,000. So if we're going to tax the asset, let's tax the bank, because they own the asset. You mentioned the Thornhill report, which you said this was based on. But of course, the Thornhill report's recommendation was not 0.18%. As you know, it was 0.1%. So nearly half of what you're bringing in. And critically, the Thornhill report recognised stamp duty. It recognised the tens of thousands of euro that have been paid by so many people, an awful lot of whom are now in negative equity, and back to the first point, don't have an asset. They don't have an asset that they're being taxed on. So I'd be delighted if you'd look at some of the other recommendations in the Thornhill report, at having the rate, at looking at stamp duty, and of course at looking at the asset. Now, you very eloquently deconstructed the name of the bill. It is a tax. It is on property. I accept that. The bit on local, I have to say I would disagree with you on, and I can use my own situation. I rent. I live in Greystones. I rent. I'm not going to have to pay it. I would pay it, actually. I, as the other deputies in here, I'm paid a very good wage for what I do. And I would pay it to Wicklow County Council, because I and my family use services provided by Wicklow County Council. But I'm not going to have to pay it. That's the point. Now, I actually do own an apartment, or rather the bank owns an apartment with my name on it, in Dublin. So I'm going to pay on Dublin, which I don't live in, and I'm not going to pay in Wicklow, which I do live in. And actually, I'm going to pay on negative equity in Dublin, and I'm not going to pay anything to Wicklow County Council. It goes to the very heart of the technical flaws within this legislation. I, to be honest, wouldn't have a problem paying, as a resident of Wicklow and as someone on a very decent income, I wouldn't have a problem with paying a local government tax in Wicklow. But I'm not going to have to do that. I'm going to have to pay it in Dublin on a piece of negative equity. So it really just goes to the heart of the bizarre nature of this bill. Now, you said in reply to my question, and I thank you for the reply, that the amendments will be dealt with. They won't be dealt with tonight. We know that they will be dealt with as part of the finance bill. But you mentioned the bits that would be dealt with. And you mentioned, or rather you didn't mention negative equity. You didn't mention ability to pay. And you didn't mention regional variations, which Deputy Mitchell believes may lead to revolution in Ireland. So I just leave you with two thoughts. I imagine this is my last contribution this evening. And they are relevant to Deputy Doherty's amendment, which is this, and Deputy's already touched on it. Myself and one or two deputies here, when we were, during the previous conversation, were talking about the inability to pay and the stress of this piece of legislation. And actually, what we were talking about as well was people who were coming into the constituency offices talking about suicide, who were becoming suicidal because they were having to figure out where they were going to get the money. And of course, as was mentioned by Deputy Higgins, now they owe the money to the revenue. I mean, it's bad enough owing it to the bank, but you certainly don't want to owe it to the revenue commissioners. And as you know, the personal insolvency bill wouldn't help them, because any money owed to the state, or indeed to a local authority, is exempt from any insolvency process. So, Minister, I'd ask you just to reflect on that over the break, when this may come back to the Finance Committee, it may come back to the House, and just say that the IMF, you have cited that the Troika is responsible for this. If you study what the IMF has done over the last number of decades, you'll see that they come in for an awful lot of criticism. They've done an awful lot of very bad things. They privatized education in parts of Africa. And people said locally that they shouldn't do it because kids would be pulled out of school. Now, the IMF said, well, look, according to our economic models, this is the right thing to do. So theoretically, this is the right thing to do. What happened in Africa in those countries is that all the kids got pulled out of school because no one had the money. No one had the money to meet the theory. Reality and practice just didn't meet. And in a crisis situation, an economic crisis situation like this one, theory, which is for steady state economies, property tax, broaden the revenue base, local services, all of that theory, it's good theory for steady state economies. But what the IMF is guilty of, time and again, all over the world, across the last number of decades, is enforcing theoretical solutions to crisis situations. And this feels to me like yet another one of those. And in 2008, ironically, the IMF was running out of money because we were in this global boom. And they came to the Kennedy School and they had a full mea culpa and said, we'll stop doing this. You know, suddenly there was no money for their kids to go to private education in DC. That sounds flippant, but that was actually the case. They were running out of money because they couldn't lend anybody any money. And that's, of course, how they pay for themselves. And they said, we won't do this anymore. We've learned from the past. But they clearly haven't. Because I don't believe you have to do this because of the Troika, but I absolutely accept that they would like to bring this in. Because in their theoretical models, that's the right thing to do. I'm finishing right now, Laskia Corla, thank you. So over the break, Minister, I would ask you to just reflect on the various points, on the inability to pay, on the stress, and on the fact that the IMF gets this wrong most of the time by applying theory to crisis, and it doesn't work. Thank you.